Greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Voices of the Ataxia Community, an introduction to patient-focused drug development. It's my pleasure to be together with you all again today. I'm Lori Sjogren, Community Program and Services Director for the National Ataxia Foundation, and I'll be assisting with today's webinar. Today's webinar is meant to provide you with information about the upcoming patient-focused drug development meeting that NAF, in partnership with CureDRPLA, is having with the FDA on September 25th. The executive directors of NAF and CureDRPLA, Andrew Rosen and Andrea Compton, will start us out today with some opening remarks. Now I'd like to invite Andrea to kick things off. Welcome, Andrea.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Andrea Compton, and I'm the executive director of CureDRPLA. I'd like to welcome all of the DRPLA participants that have joined us here today. CureDRPLA is really fortunate to be partnering with the National Ataxia Foundation for the upcoming patient-focused drug development meeting. I'd now like to turn it over to Andrew Rosen, the executive director of the National Ataxia Foundation. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Rosen. I am the executive director at the National Ataxia Foundation. I am so excited to be with you all today. We've been planning this meeting that's coming up in September for the better part of a year now. It's a critical step and a milestone event as we get ever closer to having approved treatments for ataxia. And we're so excited that you'll be able to share with the Food and Drug Administration, with the FDA, how ataxia impacts your life on a daily basis. Lori, if you can go to the next slide, I do want to thank our really generous sponsors who have helped support the meeting, Unicure, Biohaven Pharmaceuticals, and Ionis. We thank you for your support. We couldn't do this without you. And then lastly, I do want to introduce our two speakers today, James Valentine and Larry Bauer. James is an associate attorney with Hyman Phelps and McNamara, where he assists medical product industry and patient advocacy organization clients in a wide range of regulatory matters, including new drug and biologic development and approval issues. Prior to joining the firm, James worked for the FDA Office of the Commissioner, where he facilitated patient input in benefit risk decision making and served as a liaison to stakeholders on a wide range of regulatory policy issues. He also helped launch the patient-focused drug development program, which we are all going to be a part of in September. His colleague, Larry Bauer, is a senior regulatory drug expert with the same firm and does much of similar work to what James does. Prior to joining the firm, he also worked at the FDA in CDER's Rare Diseases Program, working on policy, education, and science related to rare disease drug development. He also serves on the National Organization for Rare Disorders, NORD's Advocacy Committee. These two would be the inaugural members of the Patient-Focused Drug Development Hall of Fame, if there was one. And so we are thrilled that they are here today and they're going to help us through this process. James and Larry, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Can we have the next slide, please? So James and I are here today to help orient you and tell you a little bit about patient-focused drug development meetings. We'd like to educate you first a little bit about the Food and Drug Administration. Sometimes there's a lot of misunderstandings about what actually does the FDA do. We're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to live with SCA and DRPLA. We'd like to learn more about your concerns as the disease progresses. Part of the meeting, the PFDD meeting, is going to be about how you're currently managing SCA and DRPLA. And then we're also going to talk about what meaningful treatments look like for you. Next. So why should I participate in the meeting? Well, this is a unique opportunity for people in the ataxia community to have your voices heard. So the FDA is the federal agency that approves all new treatments. So any new treatment for ataxia, DRPLA, they're going to be approved at the FDA, and the staff doing the review need to know what is important to you. And having this knowledge is going to impact their decision making and lead to better treatments and potentially faster approvals for ataxia. The next slide. So why now? The patient's voice has historically been absent from the drug development process. So until a drug was approved by the FDA, they didn't understand often, especially for rare diseases, they didn't understand like what endpoints they should study or what was important, what would be an important treatment for someone with a certain disease. And sometimes when a clinical trial was failing and the drug company or FDA wanted input from actual patients to understand the problem, that's the time that they would reach out for patient input. But this has changed over time, and the FDA started to realize that they need input from patients at every stage of drug development, and that they wanted to hear your voices at the beginning of the process as well as throughout. And over time, stakeholder engagement, so working with the patient communities, with patient advocacy groups, it has become a real priority at the FDA. And so to come up with a systematic way of gathering this information, they initiated something called the Patient-Focused Drug Development Program to learn about disease impacts on patients' lives, both from patients as well as from their caregivers. Next. So just to give you an overview, we're going to talk a little bit about the FDA and drug development. This is more just for your information to learn about how the FDA works. And then that will be followed by James is going to give us an introduction to FDA's patient-focused drug development program and how this has evolved over time. And then we're going to close towards the end of this meeting, we'll talk about how can each of you participate in the meeting. So what are some of the logistics? What is the format for your participation, and what are some tips about how to get involved? And then we'll talk about some other important information like registration, as well as have plenty of time at the end for questions. Next. So this first section is on FDA and drug development. Next. So the first thing, when a company wants to develop a new drug, this process is called drug discovery. So typically researchers discover new drugs through getting insights into a disease process that allows them to design a product to stop or reverse the effects of the disease. They do many tests of molecular compounds to find the possible beneficial effects against any of a large number of diseases. So they screen numerous drugs before they kind of find one that they think that they have a hypothesis it might work. They also look at existing treatments that may have unanticipated effects. And they look at new technologies, such as those that provide new ways to target medical products to specific sites within the body, or to manipulate genetic material. I'm sure many of you have heard about gene therapies and some of the advances that are being made in gene therapies. So once the researchers identify a promising compound, one that they think might work, then the development of drugs, it follows a well-established path to make sure that they're safe and effective when they reach the public. These are the two qualities that the FDA evaluates. Is this drug safe, at least reasonably safe, or can we treat the side effects? And is it effective that it's going to do what the label says it's supposed to do? Next. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to take you fairly quickly through the different stages of drug development. And as I said earlier, every drug goes through this similar pattern of development. So the very first stage is preclinical development. So this means before a drug enters the clinic, and the clinic is where a drug is given to human beings. And the primary goal at this stage of drug development is to determine whether this new drug, is it reasonably safe to try it in human beings? And do we think it's going to be sufficiently effective against a disease target? And we test that by often giving them to animals first, and to animals, sometimes animals are created that have a model of a disease. So the animal reproduces the same kind of disease that we would see in the human. And the end result of this preclinical stage is that the company submits something called an investigational new drug application. And this is how they can first administer a drug to human beings. Next. So the phase one, this is the first part where the drug actually gets into the clinic. We've done these early farm tox studies to look at safety. the company has to figure out how they're going to manufacture the drug and give that information to the FDA. And then they have to develop a clinical protocol or a trial that really outlines how they're going to do the study. And at this stage, the goals are to really focus on the drug safety, see if there's any side effects that start to emerge, and look at how the drug is metabolized in the body and how do you excrete it? Does it come out in the urine? Is it processed in the liver? Those kinds of things. From phase 1, we move to phase 2. Next slide. So in phase 2, the primary goals are more about looking at how effective is this drug. So does this drug work in the people who have a certain disease? And to do this, we often compare a drug against placebo. So maybe half the people in the study are getting placebo that looks like the drug, and the other half are getting the actual drug. And we compare to see if there's a difference in the effect that each of those groups have. And during this time, we also continue to monitor for short-term side effects and other safety issues. Once we have this understanding of the drug safety, we move into phase 3. Next slide. And the primary goals in phase 3, this is where, so we've got some information about the safety and that it generally works. This is when the drug is moved up into large scale testing. So often this is hundreds, even thousands of people enter into clinical trials. We continue to assess the drug's effectiveness. How long does the effect work? Does it work the same in different populations? And does it work the same at different dosages? So there might be some trial of that. And once again, the safety evaluation continues, including at this point, looking at potential drug interactions. So if you're taking a medicine for blood pressure or diabetes, how does this drug interact with that? And from phase 3, we go to the NDABLA submission. An NDA is a new drug application. That's for like any kind of a new pill that's being, or capsule that's being submitted, and a BLA is a biologics licensing application. And those are for biologics drugs. So those are things like vaccines and things that are where they're developed with living cells. So FDA holds a meeting to review the submission to the FDA. They identify what are the main studies that are going to show that this drug truly is effective. They discuss the methods of how the statistics to evaluate the effectiveness, and they uncover any major unresolved issues. And when the company gets to this point, this means that they've collected all the data from their trials. They've got all that their manufacturing data, and they put all this into a package, and they submit this package, this NDA or BLA package, to the FDA. And this is when the FDA takes anywhere from 6 to 10 months usually to review all of this information and then to make a final decision whether they're going to approve the drug or not. Or sometimes they say that they need additional information before they can approve the drug. Next. So in the FDA, the FDA looks to see if the application is complete. They assign a group of people, a group of experts, to review the application. And they look at the effectiveness to see if the drug demonstrates its proposed use. And they look at the safety assessment to see if it's adequate to conclude that the drug is safe. And by safe, that means that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks. And they evaluate whether the manufacturing methods and the controls used to maintain the product quality are adequate. So can this drug be made again and again, like for thousands or hundreds of thousands of doses? And they want to make sure that there's a system in place that will make sure that each pill, each sample of the drug is the same. Sometimes they in certain situations, they need to put together an advisory committee. This is a special meeting to address special concerns related to the NDA or BLA. Next. And then once a drug is approved, there's actually continued surveillance of that drug in what we call the post-market safety period. So this is after a drug is approved and it's being used widely in the market. So knowledge about a product will always be limited at the time of approval. So at the time a drug gets approved by the FDA, maybe it's been given to several hundred people or thousands, but we don't know what's going to happen when you give it to many thousand people. And the reason for this is that clinical studies are brief in duration and involve a limited patient population, and new safety information often emerges after a product is used in a wider patient population, and that needs to be taken into consideration, and sometimes we have to make adaptations to the labeling of the drug. And the FDA maintains an active program in post-market safety surveillance to monitor adverse events. So for any drug, people can always call in, or physicians can call in if they see a side effect, especially a serious side effect when someone's using a new drug. Next. So what exactly is FDA's role? Next. So the FDA does not develop drugs. Drug development takes place by researchers, like at colleges and universities, as well as pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes nonprofit groups conduct disease research on drug development as well. And FDA also does not test drugs in clinical trials. They don't run clinical trials. The staff are not on site for clinical trials, but the researchers conducting the trials must seek FDA approval before beginning, and the FDA staff will review the results of those trials. Next. Another thing is that the FDA does not have any authority to regulate the practice of medicine. So FDA regulates the development and marketing of medical products, but not how the drug is actually used in the real world setting. So doctors, once a drug is approved, a doctor is free to prescribe FDA approved drugs for other conditions. So for instance, if there was a new cancer treatment developed for lung cancer, a physician has the right to try that drug in a different disease, like maybe bladder cancer, because they think that there's a similar mechanism of action and maybe it would work there. And this is referred to as off-label use. Another misconception, FDA does not regulate the price of medicines. Consideration of drug prices is not part of FDA's mandate. They can't base their approval decisions based on drug prices, and the FDA doesn't even receive pricing information during a review. So when they're looking at a drug to see whether they should approve it or not, they have no idea what the final charge for that drug will be. Next. So FDA's mission is to promote the public health. The reviewers have expert knowledge on drug development and clinical trials, so they can provide technical help. They can help the companies design clinical trials and studies and give them feedback about proposed designs. And they have a lot of meetings with companies throughout the drug development process to make sure that things are evolving in a scientific way. And another thing that FDA does is that they ask manufacturers of new drugs to pay user fees under something called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. So these fees, when a new drug is being submitted to the FDA for review, the drug company has to pay a fee, and these fees help support FDA's involvement in drug development and the agency's review of marketing applications. Next. And if you'd like more information on FDA's regulation of medical products, as well as other ways to get involved, here is a website that you can look up after this webinar. Next. So now I'd like to turn it over to James. James is going to tell us a little bit now about, excuse me, patient-focused drug development.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And it's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon here in the Washington, D.C. area where Larry and I are both located. We thought it was really important to spend some time, as Larry did, explaining a little bit about, drug development, the different stages of that, and then importantly, FDA's role, because FDA is a key stakeholder for us at this patient-focused drug development meeting. And so it's really important as we talk about what this PFDD initiative is about and what a PFDD meeting will look like, to know who our audience is and where they do and don't get involved. So we always want to have that, kind of background in mind. So with that, I'm going to talk to you a bit about PFDD, what it is, why it's important, So if we can go to our next slide. So these patient-focused drug development meetings, this was created when I was back at FDA back in 2012 as a way for FDA to more systematically get patient input to really recognizing patients and their direct caregivers, like loved ones, whether maybe you're a spouse or a parent, you know, as really experts in the disease experience. And so, recognizing that this was an untapped, really, you know, kind of area of expertise, wanting to be able to learn from you all about, you know, your experience with the condition, as well as your experience with available treatment options, and thinking of that in a broad sense. You know, there was a recognition that this is really important to help in making some of those key decisions that Larry talked about when making benefit risk assessments about approval. We'll talk about that in a minute a little bit more, but all throughout development in terms of helping inform, you know, what we should be measuring in clinical trials, how we should be designing clinical trials. And so, you know, your voices have an important role, you know, early and often throughout drug development and review at FDA. Next slide. So one of the most important decisions that FDA makes is to decide whether or not a new drug or biological product should be approved to be on the market. So to be available for patients and their doctors to be able to prescribe those medications. And in doing that, Larry talked about you know, that new drug application that FDA reviews. And ultimately, one of the key parts of that decision they have to make is whether the benefits of a drug outweigh its risks. And so you can imagine it's you know, the FDA scientists and clinicians are looking at the data and they're determining what are the benefits, you know, based off of what the trial results are. They're looking at the data saying, what are the risks? What are the safety concerns, you know, based off of the different side effects that were experienced during the clinical trials. Those are scientific judgments. But then FDA has to balance those two things and conclude that the benefits really do outweigh the risks. Well, there's no formula for that. That's a very disease-specific determination. Every condition, you know, based off of the unmet need and the seriousness of it, you know, there may be a greater risk tolerance. So you may be willing to accept more side effects because you don't have treatment options, and there's a cost to doing nothing. There's a cost to not having that treatment option available, which is, you know, the burden of the disease itself, the progression of the disease itself. So that's exactly what PFDD meetings are designed to help inform, is what you see here, the analysis of the condition and current treatment options, which sets that context for the regulators. So that way they can weigh benefits and risks and do it specific for you. So it's not based off of, you know, what they know about any other kind of disease. It's not based off of what they personally would accept as a person. It's not based off of what, you know, doctors are saying, you know, is reasonable. It's really based off of what, you know, the people who would ultimately be using the product, you, the patient, feel about your disease and your unmet needs that exist. Next slide. So this meeting is designed specifically to kind of elicit that type of input. You know, this meeting is based on a framework with particular, very specific discussion questions that will be asked, which are derived to help inform that benefit risk framework that FDA operates under. It really represents those most important considerations in their decision making that set that context. We, of course, in planning this meeting, in partnership with the, you know, kind of being brought in to help advise in the planning of this meeting, helped with the review of this and other questions to really tailor this particular patient-focused drug development meeting in a way that will help communicate what is most important for SCA and DRPLA to FDA. And it's important that, you know, you all really are going to be the experts at this meeting. We're not having panels of doctors. FDA is not going to get up and talk about what they know. You know, really, it's our participants in the meeting, you all showing up on the day of the meeting in this new virtual setting and actively participating. We're going to talk about what that looks like, but that's how we're going to inform these key FDA decisions, is by hearing from you. Next slide. Importantly, and it's worth talking about this and reiterating it, the meeting itself is, of course, going to be really important and valuable. There's going to be FDA officials attending the meeting. They're listening and learning from you. But also, all of your input from that meeting and any additional written input we might receive that we don't have time to read out loud during the meeting will together be collectively summarized in what's called a voice of the patient report, which will serve as the official summary of the meeting. It will incorporate your quotes from you all that you share throughout the day. It will incorporate the other types of inputs that we get throughout the meeting. This will be communicated to FDA, but also made available for researchers and drug developers so that they all can benefit from this information and the learnings from you. So this is going to be really important. It's something that FDA looks forward to receiving. I've even heard some of the doctors at FDA that do these reviews, they keep these reports on their desk so they can reference them when they are doing reviews. They are very valuable to the FDA. Next slide. So now that I've kind of given you the framework for why this is important, fits into what Larry described. We want to talk a little bit more specifically about what this meeting looks like, what you can expect. Next slide. So here's some of the key meeting logistics. We're really, we're inviting lots of different stakeholders to attend. We're inviting you all, patients and direct caregivers, but we're also inviting others that will serve in a listening capacity. We're going to invite, of course, the FDA staff to attend. We're also going to invite pharma and biotech companies who might be developing products for your condition to attend, to be able to listen and learn. But it's really you, the patients and caregivers, that we need to show up because we need to hear from you actively throughout the day. This is going to occur, as has been mentioned, on September 25th. And this is going to be from 9:30 to 3 with a few breaks included in there. This is going to be a virtual meeting, given the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. This is kind of the new normal that we're operating in, but we've developed a really robust virtual format. We've actually been testing it in some of the other groups that Larry and I work with. So we'll even have it further refined for when we host this meeting in September. And so this will be a virtual kind of live webcast format event. And I'll talk about specifically the ways that you'll be able to participate in that webcast. Next slide. So the agenda, kind of at a high level, we're going to, of course, have some opening remarks. We'll hear from our hosting patient organizations, the National Ataxia Foundation and CureDRPLA. We'll also have some opening remarks from FDA. After that, we're going to set a foundation for FDA. We can't expect them to have the same kind of basic understanding of the condition, the biology behind it, et cetera. And so we're going to have a disease or a clinical expert provide that background for FDA. But that's really all going to be very brief, and it's going to set up the core of the meeting, which are those next two topics, which is understanding how your conditions, the symptoms and health effects that you have, which ones are most burdensome on your life and how they have impacts on your life. And then we're going to build on that in a second topic to talk about managing symptoms through treatments and what you use, how well it's working, any downsides, and focusing on also what you want from future treatments. We'll do this through a number of different ways that I'll talk about. And then, of course, we'll summarize and close out the meeting. Next slide. So you may be wondering, well, what you talked about, so you're going to ask us certain questions. What might those questions look like? And so here's a sample preview of some of those questions that are key questions. So in that first topic, where we really want to understand what it means to live with SCA or DRPLA, what are the most burdensome and significant symptoms and health effects that you experience in daily life? We want to know kind of how those different things, symptoms change, whether that's day to day, week to week, month to month, or even over the course of years of progression. And then we also want to know why those things are most, are burdening your life and what those impacts look like. And so we're going to ask you about activities that are impacted in your daily lives. Next slide. We're also going to, as I mentioned, talk about how they change over time, but recognizing that not all manifestations of the condition or maybe the full progression of the condition will have been experienced at the time of the meeting. We know that you may have worries and fears for the future too as you get older. And so we'll ask about that in topic 1. Next slide. Then, as I previewed, we'll be building in topic 2 on understanding challenges in treatment of the disease. And so we're going to ask you questions about what it is that you're currently doing. This is not just prescription drugs, but really anything in life more holistically even that you might be doing, as well as other types of medical procedures. We're going to try to get a sense of how well those things are working for you, if at all, as well as what are the most significant downsides, whether that be side effects, burden of needing to go to a doctor or a hospital for treatment. And then once we've explored what you're currently doing and kind of gotten that, have that described to us, we're then going to look to the future. And while we all, of course, would love for a cure, we recognize that there may be a pipeline of products that are going to come before a cure. And so we want to know what specific things would you be looking for in an ideal treatment that would have some kind of meaningful impact in your life. So what are your treatment goals? What are your preferences for treatments? Next slide. So the discussion format, this is the ways that you'll get to be able to participate. We will be kicking off each of those topics with a panel of patients. They're going to set the foundation by sharing some of their experiences and their thoughts, representing a range of different experiences with the condition. We recognize that the panel won't be covering nearly even close to all of the different experiences in the community. It's just a place to start, and then we're going to expand that to all of you that will be participating live. We're actually going to have some live polling questions throughout the entire program, where you'll be able to use your phone or open up a new, open up a web browser tab and actually follow along and answer questions for us in that live format. We can see the results in real time. That way we get a sense of everybody who's participating and what their experiences are. But really, the greatest part of this is going to be a facilitated discussion. And I'll be serving as your moderator. So I'll be posing those questions to you and asking you to call in and share with me live and talk to me, and we'll have a conversation about your experiences and what your thoughts are. There'll also be an option for people to submit written comments live throughout the day that will be read as well. Next slide. So now that you have that sense of what this meeting is, what it looks like, how you'll be able to participate, we want to just give you some tips as you think about and prepare yourself for actually participating in the meeting in September. Keep in mind what you learned today in terms of about FDA's role and the purpose of the meeting. Go back and look at this recording, look at those discussion questions, start to think about them and what it is that's most important that you think are the most important responses that you have to those questions that you want to share. We'll want you to try to look at those questions because we're going to be going to them at different points during the meeting. So that way you'll be able to share what is most important to you at the right time. I want to reiterate that even if someone else says something and that resonates with you, that's you're thinking, oh yeah, I agree with that. We don't want you to think that and then say, okay, well, someone already said it, now I don't. Actually, it's really important for FDA to hear things that are common or similar experiences. That lets them know that it actually isn't just one person's experience, but maybe multiple people. We want you to, we'll ask because it will be, because it's a limitation of any type of meeting, we have limited time. So we want to hear from as many people as possible. So try to think about how you can answer those questions in a concise and focused way. And just remember that if we can't get to you or if you aren't able to participate in the whole meeting and there's something that you want to provide, we will be collecting comments in addition. Next slide. So just to reiterate, we're kind of getting really into the weeds here of the specifics. You'll be able to participate, you'll be able to tune in live, see the live broadcast of the web-based meeting. remotely. You'll be able to answer polling questions. You'll be able to call in. You'll be able to write in. All of your responses will be kept confidential. Only what you share, is in the universe of what we'll know. But if you do write in, we can keep that confidential. We want to encourage you, when registration opens up in August, to go ahead and register. You can see the URL listed on this page. Keep going back to that. That's where we're gonna, you'll be able to go and access this recording. You'll be able to access other materials that are populated there. You'll also be able to, provide comments at that same location. If you want to start answering some of these questions, we're very eager to start hearing from people. It's never too early. If you want to provide some comments from an SCA patient or caregiver perspective, you can email kelsey@ataxia.org. Or if you have comments from the DRPLA perspective, you can email info@curedrpla.org. And all of the comments, whether they come in before the meeting, during the meeting, or after the meeting, will be part of that Voice of the Patient report. Next slide. So please, register when you get that link. That's how we'll send you the login link for the day of the webcast. Next slide. And after this webinar, if your questions aren't answered, or if at any point you need assistance, you'll be able to find all of the links provided today on the organization's websites, and you can always email in with questions at those same email boxes. Next slide. So in closing, I just really want to say that it's your opportunity to be heard by FDA, by developers, to really be a part of that process. You've been built in now to the process, so it's time to show up and really be heard. From my experience, I know that you can have a meaningful impact on clinical trials, on drug development. It can speed up development. It can help make FDA make better decisions. We just need you to be there to help share those experiences to help make that difference. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over. I know we have some time for questions and answers.
Certainly. So I will start with a question. This is Kelsey from NAF that was sent ahead of time. And this question is from Ken Jones, and it's about SCA2 drug approval. So the question is, as SCA2 muscle loss of control is progressive, meaning that every day SCA2 patients lose more of the ability to control their muscles, the good news is there's some exciting clinical trials in progress. What can be done to get these new drugs approved as fast as possible?
Sure. No, so this is a great question. The things that were mentioned about the progression and loss of different capabilities in SCA2 by this person who wrote in with this question, that's what we need to understand. That's what we need to help FDA understand. If they really, if you are able to describe that progression, describe those losses, and tell FDA what that means, how that's impacting your life, how that impacts your quality of life, how that impacts your independence, that then helps FDA. I talked about that benefit risk decision. If you don't describe it and tell FDA how meaningful being able to keep those capabilities are, when they see that next drug coming down the pipeline, you want them to know, even if this slows progression or halts progression, that could be really important, because at least it stops, that next loss. So, so without maybe knowing it when you ask that question, there's actually so much richness embedded in that one statement about, the progression of SCA2. We really want to hear from, all of, the different subtypes in this community to understand what that looks like. And if FDA understands what that looks like, that will help them make better decisions.
Yeah, one other thing that this meeting can help to help educate the FDA review staff. For instance, if a new drug was being developed, you spoke about ataxia being a progressive disease, but so say that someone developed a drug that just halted progression. There was no improvement in your condition, but it only halted the progression of the muscle degeneration. The FDA might look at that and say, well, that's not really a drug effect. That doesn't really help. But by hearing from patients, and maybe if the patients say, actually, halting progression would be very important to us, that could change the FDA's thinking during their review and when they're looking at how a study is designed and say, this drug doesn't have to cure ataxia, this drug doesn't even have to improve it, but if it halts, progression of muscle deterioration, this is going to be a significant change because the patients told us that. So that's another aspect why it's so important to get your voice communicated to the FDA.
Well, thanks so much, James and Larry, for your help getting us so prepared for this exciting meeting with the FDA. And the previous question kind of leads us into another question from one of our attendees asking if those with other types of ataxia besides SCA or DRPLA can participate, which I think it's great that the audience can participate in this meeting in so many different ways. So are there other types of ataxias, such as Friedreichs or AOA, those folks that would be helpful for them to participate in this meeting?
Sure. So, and feel free, anyone on the planning team, to chime in on this as well. There have been other meetings for, some other ataxias. There has, for example, been a patient-focused drug development meeting on Friedreichs ataxia. So that was, specifically focused on before. So, our focus here is on, the SCAs and DRPLA. But that doesn't mean that there's not other ways that your voice can be heard. And that link that Larry provided and spoke to, that FDA webpage for patients, there's lots of other programs where your voices can be heard. But I would encourage you to reach out to the National Ataxia Foundation and talk about how you can work with them to also bring your voice to FDA, even if it's not in the course of this specific meeting.
Thanks, James. And another question is, so the FDA invites these patient-focused drug development meetings as a way to educate themselves in the disease and help in the drug development process. Is there other ways besides this patient-focused drug development meeting that the FDA gathers patient input?
Sure, and actually in that website, that again, it's a really great resource. There's actually a whole web page devoted to showing the whole list of different ways that FDA does this. Just to mention a couple of specific ones, FDA, for example, utilizes what are called patient representatives. So these are individual patients or caregivers who they can consult as needed, and importantly, can serve on those advisory committees when FDA is reviewing that new drug application. They often will convene an advisory committee of external experts to help them in their decision making. And there's always a patient representative that serves on those advisory committee meetings. So that's a really valuable way you can go and you can apply for that program. Anyone can do that. There's other types of things where patient organizations can request other types of meetings. There's also, very specific things that FDA, recruits for people to participate in different public workshops and whatnot. And those are all listed online at that website.
Thanks so much, James. One of our attendees asked if we're close to developing a drug for folks with SCA, and there are clinical trials currently happening for drugs for the treatment of SCA. So thank you for that question. And let's see here if we have any other questions here.
Just to address that one of the resources for people is there's a website that NIH runs called Clinicaltrialsgov, and that's where every single clinical trial being run in the country and even some from abroad are listed, and you can search by disease. So not only for ataxia, but if you have a friend that has a disease that's looking for a clinical trial, you can type the name of the disease in the search engine. It'll list the trials that have been completed, the trials that are still being planned that haven't started yet, and the trials that are currently up and running and looking for people to register for. So you could put any form of ataxia, you could put in the search there, and it would bring up the entire list of what trials are currently available.
Well, thanks so much for mentioning that website, Larry. And that would also be applicable to any drugs for DRPLA as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Excellent. There was a similar question regarding that as well. All right, so what about undiagnosed versions? Genetic testing, prohibitively expensive for many. I would think with this one, and you guys can feel free to chime in, or any of the other folks on our panel, most of the time those with undiagnosed types of ataxia are not going to be included in clinical trials, but if there is drugs out there that are approved for symptomatic treatment, they may be applicable to those with an undiagnosed form of ataxia.
Yeah, this goes to that, when I was earlier, I shared that thing called off-label use. So
right.
Even though something is specifically, developed for SCA and the label says this is for the treatment of, spinocerebellar ataxia, but a doctor has the right that if he has a patient with an undetermined form of ataxia, and they have a similar symptom that he thinks that the drug might work, they are able to use that drug off-label for those people. The problem is, though, like you were saying, Lori, when a clinical trial is going on, if it's specific for one type of ataxia, if you've got an undiagnosed type, you probably will not meet the enrollment criteria and not be allowed to participate in the trial.
Correct. Thanks, Larry. All right, so one of our attendees would like to know, are there drugs right now that halt the progression for SCA? There is not, but there's currently clinical trials being conducted for drugs that we hope will accomplish that. And let's see.
Lori, this is Kelsey. I'm going to jump in with a question. I've seen two questions that are kind of related. The first one, is this a global event, and would you encourage people with SCA and DRPLA to attend from all other countries? And kind of to piggyback off of that, is there a limit to the number of people that can participate on the day of?
Yeah, great question. So anyone from around the world can attend the meeting. It's focused on the Food and Drug Administration, but a lot of the lessons learned to regulatory bodies around the world. Also, clinical trials being done in rare diseases like these are almost always global clinical trial programs. So you'll have sites, of course, in the United States, but also in Europe and perhaps even other regions. And so, FDA is reviewing data that is coming from these other regions. So it's good for them to hear, from others outside of the U.S. As well. So it is kind of open and welcome. And we've done meetings. We've had callers from South America, Europe, Africa. So for sure, please, if you're interested in attending, please do attend. In terms of capacity, no, there's no limit on the number of individuals who can tune in live that day.
Yeah, one example of this, James and I are working with another group for a very rare disease that primarily affects people in the Ashkenazi Jewish population. So on that upcoming patient-focused drug development meeting, we're expecting to have a large number of people from Israel calling into that meeting. So yeah, they definitely are international.
Great. So with this process, does patient input also help with the FDA and their approval of not only drugs, but medical treatments such as deep brain stimulation or gene therapies or different things like that, other than pharmaceutical drugs?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not specific just to small molecule traditional drugs. We'll be inviting members from all over FDA to participate. Those that, this program was created by those that are the regulators that review drugs and those that review biological products. That includes cell and gene therapies. The device group at FDA has their own kind of ways of getting patient input, but we'll still be sure to invite them as well.
That's great to hear. I think we've covered a number of topics here.
Yeah, when James was talking about ways to participate in the meeting, he mentioned that we're going to have 2 panels, and those people will be selected, and there'll be probably about 5 people on each panel. And then there's another way to participate. We'll have on the day of the meeting, we'll have something called discussion starters. So those will be about 5 people for each panel. That will be people that are calling in on a Zoom call, and you'll be able to see their faces on the screen, and James, as the moderator for the meeting, will be able to ask those people specific questions. And so it's just a way to add another dimension to participation, and we will be looking for people to become discussion starters as well as panelists.
Well, that's excellent. And one of our attendees would like to know how many of these meetings are held each year. And I feel like it's not an annual thing, it's more on a need basis. Welcome to speak more to the frequency of these, how often these meetings are held.
Yeah, so these, there's 2 types. I didn't really go into this much, but the initial ones were actually run by FDA. And so that was what started back in 2012. In 2015, FDA expanded that to allow external groups to host these meetings, and kind of were phasing out of their hosting them because they really couldn't keep up with the demand. I mean, there's over 7,000 known just rare diseases. And so the demand, kind of grew faster than their capacity. So they saw this opportunity. If patient organizations could help in the planning of this, then it would make it so they could participate in more. So FDA led 26 of their own meetings, and that was across both rare and more common diseases. And then since the externally led program started in 2015, there have been so far 36 of these meetings. And so, there's, somewhere between like 5 and 10 a year. And it really is driven by need of particular communities and organizations like NAF and CureDRPLA stepping up and putting in a request to have that meeting. So you're in good hands with these organizations who really went out above and beyond to make sure that you all had this important opportunity.
Well, thanks so much, James and Larry. Looks like we have covered all of our submitted questions, unless there's any other questions. Looks like we've covered them all. So great job with providing so much information. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience today?
No, I mean, great questions. I hope you'll go back, use this webcast as a webinar as a reference, refresh yourself ahead of the meeting. But really, you already have the most important background that you need, which is your own experiences. So if you just show up and you're, ready to, participate, ready to answer our questions, that'll be great. So we're really looking forward to hopefully seeing or being at least virtually seeing you on September 25th.
Yeah, and I just want to say we're very excited. We heard that there were actually hundreds of people that registered for this webinar. And that's what, when we hear that there's that much interest and support, it's very exciting for us to help in this planning for your meeting. And the only way it can happen is if you all participate. So we, really want to ask you to register for the meeting and get involved.
Well, thanks so much, James and Larry. And as James and Larry mentioned, this community, you guys are the experts, so we need you all to participate. And to find out more information on how to get involved, it's on our organization's website, NAS website, and CureDRPLA's website. And we'll certainly be emailing out additional details on how everyone can get involved coming up. And so stay tuned for that. And just to let everybody know, a recording of this webinar will be made available. And thank you all for joining us today. Take care, everyone, and stay well.